this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure.
Welcome to the very first episode of The Heart of Storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain and I am your host for this program. It's a program that I want to start to celebrate the tradition of oral storytelling. As you know, many people throughout history talk about story being transmitted orally before it was written down, and in fact that we don't know the stories that existed prior to the invention of writing in about 3000 BCE. This episode will be about me, and that might seem a little bit vain, but I do need to introduce myself to you so you know who you're talking to. So I have been a teacher for about 30 years, and I became very interested in storytelling during COVID. I'm one of the COVID discoverers where people find their own purpose in life, and it was one of those moments where everything all made sense to me. I was very and have been very unhappy in teaching and education for a long time, and for me it feels like poking pins in my eyes. It's so damaging, and I'm suffering from burnout, and it's not a great place to be. But during COVID, I returned back to the place I grew up, and I was very mentally unwell because I hated my job. And in that time, I was lying on the floor and I looked up at the books in my collection, and I've moved around a lot. And so the books I found, I realised it was a moment of enlightenment where I realised that they were all fairy tales or collections of folk tales. They were all things that I carried with me my whole life, and I didn't realise it was there right in front of me, the thing I love most of all, which is folk and fairy tale. And of course from there I dived deep into fairy tale, and I'm still continuing to love fairy tale. But there was something about me. I have been writing for quite some time, but haven't had a lot of success with my writing. And there was something in me that thought, you know what? There has to be a better way to tell a story. And then, I don't know how, but I discovered oral storytelling, and I was absolutely blown away that someone could have a job where they were in a story, they were literally in the story, and being able to tell a story and engage an audience and to invite this presence of the story to come alive in that very moment. I didn't realise it was a job that people could do. And from there, I've just learned so much. I made contact with a storyteller in Hobart, and he invited me to tell a story with him. And at the time, I just rehearsed the story. I didn't really understand the art of storytelling, and I still don't, which is one of the reasons I started this podcast, to help me and others to understand the art form better by asking people who know far more than me. And I told Rumpelstiltskin, and it was very robotic, and I tried to be expressive, and I was a little bit dramatic. And you can find a video of that, my very first telling, on YouTube. But I also told some fairy tales in my class, and it was in that class where I told Red Riding Hood, and there was a student who came back the next day, and she was not a kid who liked reading or writing, and she had written her own version of Red Riding Hood. And for me as a teacher, that was amazing, because I had engaged her in literature, I'd engaged her in language, imagination, and she'd taken something of her own initiative to move into that space. I was just over the moon with that moment, and remains one of my most treasured teaching moments, actually. And I realised the power that story, and particularly folk and fairy tale, have in being able to transform people, because they're stories that we're familiar with. Some of them not so much, but a lot of them we are very familiar with. and it's those stories that I wanted to bring to the world. And so since then I've been researching storytelling and fairy tales, and I've been looking into things, and in 2024 I've been accepted to go to Emerson College in the UK to study storytelling for 3 months. So from that moment in August of 2020 till now, it's been a very rapid learning curve in becoming a storyteller and being a researcher of fairy tales, and holding those stories and being a presence to be able to pass these stories on to other generations. So it's quite a special place to be. And so that's a potted history of me and my experience in storytelling. And I really do hope that during this podcast that I learn just as much as you learn about storytelling and people's processes and the journey that people go on when a story comes to them. I've found with me, if I force a story to happen, it doesn't happen. It's like Liz Gilbert says in her book, Big Magic, when a story's near you, you sort of can reach out and grab it. And for me, with storytelling, it seems like the stories are picking me. They're hovering around, and then I just know which story I want to work on. And I have a very deep research process with my process. I like going back to the very first version of a story that I can find, the earliest possible version that I can find, and building it from there and using other people's interpretations of the story to mold my own fashion of the story. And I think, and I will share my version of Yeshen with you shortly, but I think that's part of the magic of a story for me, is finding its origins and seeing how close I can get to its beginnings and the possible real people that these stories are based on. They weren't all made up. A lot of them, I think, a lot of the fairy tales are based on real people or someone's real experience or their expression of their real experience. And particularly in the French salons, it was, for the women there, it was a way that they could subvert the king, men, marriage, sexuality. It was so many things they could do. So this story that I'd like to share with you today is called Yeshen, and it is from China from about 850, and it is the oldest fully intact version of Cinderella that we have. There are fragments of Cinderella type tales prior to that in ancient Greece and Egypt. However, they are only fragments, they're not a full story, and Yeshen is the very first story. So here is Yeshen. This is a story about a golden fish, magical shoes, and a girl who by the end gets to decide her own fate. Yeshen was born in the high mountains of southern China, in a time when books were still bamboo scrolls and dynasties ruled. Her mother died shortly after her birth. Her father remarried, and Yeshen got a little sister, Junli. Life was good, and Yeshen was intelligent, loved poetry and spinning on the wheel. One winter, a sickness swept through the village, taking her father with it, and Yeshen felt all alone in the world. For her stepmother treated her with cruelty, sending her into the dark forests to collect wood and over long distances to fetch water, and she stripped her of her fine clothes. One day when Yeshen was fetching water, she came by a river and decided to bathe. She washed her tattered clothing and then reclined in the water, her hair spreading out in exquisite surrender. Suddenly she felt a tickle on her leg and sat up and saw a tiny fish, no bigger than her finger, with big golden eyes, a red fin, and a moustache like her father used to have. The fish seemed to be speaking to her, and Yeshen knew she would take it with her. She scooped it up and put it in her bucket and returned home, where she hid it in a bowl under her bed. every opportunity she had, Yashen would bring it food and speak to it. The fish grew and grew and grew, and so soon it was so large she needed to find a new place for it. Yashen found a hidden cave with a narrow entrance. Inside was a large pond with a sandy bank, and that is where Yashen put her fish friend. Yashen visited her friend often, careful not to be seen by her sister. One day her stepmother did something unusual. She ordered her to take off her tattered clothing and go to the next village, which was half a day's travel away, to do an errand. Yashen did what she was told, and once she was out of sight, her stepmother, dressed in her tattered clothes, slipped a knife up her sleeve and ordered Junli to show her the way to the cave. When the stepmother arrived, the fish pillowed its head on the bank, just like it did for Yashen. The stepmother sat down, raised the knife high, and chopped off the fish's head. She picked up the fish and took it home and cooked it up for dinner. It wasn't until the next day that Yashen returned to the cave to discover that her fish friend had gone. She sobbed deeply for the loss of her mother, for the loss of her father, and for the loss of her fish friend. Her tears fell into the pond, making a ripple across its surface. At the edge of the pond, a bright light appeared, and Yashen looked up and blinked. And in the corner, this being came down from the sky. It was dressed in basic clothes with long white hair, but a kindly face. It told her of her stepmother's betrayal. The being spoke kindly to her and told her that the bones of her fish contained magic, and all she need do is retrieve the bones, and she should kneel at the bones and wish for anything that she desired. So that is what Yashen did. She went to the dung heap where her stepmother had put the bones, and every day she took out a bone and kept them carefully until she had all the bones together. Then she went back to the cave and she washed each bone with reverence and then wrapped all of the bones in one of her father's shirts. She put the shirt under her pillow, and whenever she needed anything, she knelt beside the bones. Life continued in this way for some time, and soon it was spring. The cherry blossoms were blooming, and it was time for the festival. And the festival was a time for marriages to be made, trade to be had, and catching up with old friends and family. Yashen's stepmother did not want Yashen going to the festival and ruining Junli's chances at a good marriage match. So as soon as her stepmother and sister were out of sight, Yashen knelt to the bones and asked for a disguise so magnificent that no one would recognize her. And soon she was clad in a cloak of kingfisher feathers, iridescent, sparkling in the light, and on her feet a pair of golden shoes. The base of the shoes were gold, and should she carry them they would be heavy, but on her feet they were light as air. And on the top of the shoes was embroidered like the scales of a fish, like her friend. Yashen went off to the festival and had a great time. But then she heard her stepsister saying, "Doesn't that look like our Yashen?" Yashen took a big deep breath, tried to stay calm as she walked towards the exit. As soon as she was out of sight, she ran down the hill. She ran so fast that she couldn't think of anything else. She ran so fast she didn't notice that she lost a shoe. And she didn't notice in her running that the moment she lost a shoe, the kingfisher feathers just disappeared. When she got back home, all that remained was a golden shoe, a single shoe, and the fish bones would no longer speak to her. Yashen wrapped up her father's shirt in the bones and the single shoe and fell asleep at the foot of a fruit tree. But what of the shoe? A man from the village found it and sold it to a wealthy merchant, and the wealthy merchant, seeking favour from a powerful king, sold it to a king. And now the king saw at once the magic of the shoe, and he coveted its magic more than anything in the world. So he sent out people to find the owner of the shoe, but the moment anyone tried it on, it would shrink and would not fit anybody at all. Soon he came to the village of Yeshen, and her sister and mother tried it on, and then they found Yeshen, and she came out, extended her foot, and the shoe fit her perfectly. It moulded to her feet. Yeshen pulled out the other shoe, and again she was clad in this cloak of kingfisher feathers, and she was radiant. But this is not a happily ever after. The king demanded that Yeshen tell her of the magic, where she had found it, and reluctantly Yeshen told him of the fish and the bones. The king took Yeshen, the bones, and the shoes with him back to his kingdom, and he made wishes on them in abundance. Soon he was a very, very rich man, and as a result he made Yeshen his chief wife. But Yeshen wanted nothing more than to hear the whisper of her friend the fish. One night she was lying in bed when she heard a whisper. She got up, put on a shawl, went down the stairs to the riverbank. It was sandy, and as she got closer, the whispers got louder and louder, and soon she was on her knees digging in the sand, where she found her father's shirt and the bones. She could hear her friend the fish once again. Yeshen held the shirt to her chest and knew that from this moment she and the bones would never ever be parted. And that night the tide rose and fell, and Yeshen and the bones went with the river, never to be heard of again. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.